All right. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to the Church Law and Finance. Today, we have an important topic. But before we jump into that, I know, Harriet, you and I have not done this for a little while. How are you doing?
I'm good, friend. How are you?
I'm good. Just crazy busy, but I'm good.
Always. Well, good. I'm glad. I've missed you, but I keep up with you on social media and through your calls with Jeff. So I'm glad you're well.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. And then also, I mean, I will say is in the midst of all like the schedule changes and stuff like that, I was looking at my calendar and I was like, man, this has been a busy year and it's about to get a little bit busier because I'm going, I'm teaching finance at a law firm conference / retreat in Paris in a couple weeks. So
Oh,
I'll
wow.
be back in France.
Yeah.
And then I'll stop in the UK to see my nephews on the way back. And when I get back, there's like 4 more trips and conferences I'm attending this year to where I'm just like, you know what? I'm going to
You
need a
are
break at
really
some
busy.
point.
You are really busy. It's ridiculous. But busy is a blessing because you could
Yes,
have nothing to
yes.
do at all. So we thank God for favor on your business and on your life and on your calling.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, and I do think, one of the things that's been very, you and I, we talk about this a lot, is like being able to use our professional skill set to, help our clients as well as, help other organizations. Like, you text me about, a church you were meeting with, and it's just like, I'm like, okay, let's hop on it. Let's do it. Let's do what we can to help them get things in order.
And thank you for fitting that in y'all schedule. Y'all hit Terrell last week and was like, hey, it's this church in Georgia. I know you busy. They want to sit down. And like he found time in the midst of going to Paris and the United Kingdom and Timbuktu. He's going to ride with me to Georgia next Friday. So what we need to believe God for is a jet, Terrell, so we can get to these meetings and get back like real quick.
Absolutely. Because what was very like Lola and I were laughing because like our schedule is about to be very interesting because like I leave for Paris. I come back from Paris. Like when I come back from Paris, we're going to Vegas because one of my younger cousins, she's getting married. So we're going to her wedding. We come back within like a week. Lola then has to fly to India for work. And then when Lola gets back, I go to Tennessee, then I go to San Francisco, then I'm back home for a couple weeks before I'm out again. So I'm just like, yeah, that jet sounds like, I'm gonna have to believe for
You
this
need it.
business to
You need
grow.
it. You need it. Right? And yeah, it's just it sounds crazy, but it's real because you're that
Mhm.
busy. And the time you
Yeah.
spend in airports, TSA, customs, like I don't have
Mhm.
time for this. Being very honest, Jeff and I get ready to go somewhere, and I'm just like, I really don't feel like the 20-hour flight. I don't feel like customs in a foreign country. You know what I'm saying? It's a lot. It's a lot. Let's keep it simple.
Yes, yes. But one of the good things about I think doing this show is like even in the midst of the travel, like we can still talk about some important topics because I mean I know and I'll say for those that are watching and listening, if you're listening live, you're listening afterwards, the reality of it is you're gonna hear a lot of disclaimers about this topic because we're talking about church-run schools, and I think it's a very important topic. And I'll be honest, I was almost a little hesitant to propose that we talk about this because I think that this is a subject matter that I think, especially right now, is so politically charged. I think socially charged. I mean, because when you think about, Supreme Court decisions that have come down involving religious schools, and then you think about some states have approved or made into law the use of voucher programs, and you have people who have a variety of opinions and perspectives on it. But when I sat back and I thought about like kind of why we started having these conversations, I'm like, this is one we can't just sit back on this one because my concern is if churches don't get the right, information, or they don't get exposed to, hey, here are the things you need to consider, they could be walking right into some very bad decision. They can have good intentions, but walk into some bad decisions. So this topic, I think, is a very healthy one. Now, I'll kick it to you, Harriet, to let you give the disclaimer, so people don't.
Any information that Terrell and I share on this show, it's overarching information. Is not specifically defined for you. Please don't take our legal or financial advice to heart. This is generic information that we share. We are not creating an attorney, CPA relationship with you. Take it with a grain of salt. If you would like to consult us to see if we can help your organization specifically, you can. But if you're listening on this video, it's general information. And please do not try to hold us liable for anything that you take here, misconstrue, try to apply to yourself and mess up. Because our malpractice policies will not pick this up as a claim. Thank you.
I appreciate that. I mean, and I think that one needs to be said, because I will say is, when I was just talking to Lola about this, and I was like, this probably will end up being like multiple conversations that we have, because I think when a church is considering about, starting a school that is affiliated or associated to the church, I mean, you have federal implications, you have state law implications, you have federal tax, state tax, you also have, the political conversation, you have operational decisions. Like, there are so many different facets to making this decision. So I think it'll be multiple conversations. And one thing I will say before we start to jump into it is for any church that is considering this, please understand, starting a school is not like starting a new Sunday school class. Like, they are very, very different. And there are some very serious implications you have to keep in mind if you are going to, one is keep your church out of trouble. But I think more importantly, if you're going to be able to achieve the objective that you're aiming for, you have to be aware of several different topics. So I feel like I've given enough disclaimer for people. So we'll hop into it. Now, I'm curious from your perspective what you have seen as far as, the number of churches talking about, establishing a school of some sort.
So several churches, especially your larger churches, most of them have daycares or academies and things like that. And a couple of reasons. It serves not only their parishioners, but the children in the surrounding neighborhoods, the parents who want their child to have a different sort of education, parents who want their kids to have that faith-based belief on top of the academics. So it's very common, I'll say that, for churches to have daycares, pre-K, academies, whatever, right? But it's like you said, it needs to be done. I'm going to call it decent and in order. It's very serious. There are local, state, federal rules, regulations, compliances, all of these things to think of. And so I'm glad you said that this is going to be a multi-faceted topic over cross shows, because I put together my top 5 legal concerns when following up or starting this, but they're so complex. Everyone has 5 bullet points, right? And so today, I don't know if you want us to get into overarching, this is what you can think of, and then break it down. But yeah, but I do see it, especially among your larger churches. You see them. And I know a lot of parents who prefer, especially in that fundamental 0 through 5 age, to have their children in these faith-based academic programs, because it's like the best of both worlds, right? If you're a Christian, I'm going to give you God and I'm going to give you education. And we want that while we're learning manners and respect and all the fundamentals that you would want a Christian child especially to know, right? Nothing against other faith. I'm Christian, Terrell's Christian. So we're talking about this primarily from a Christian perspective on the faith side. The legals and the accountant's going to apply regardless, but that's where I'm coming from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I agree. And I mean, I love that you have your list, because I think this conversation, I think, will be an overview, I think, of introducing to, hey, here are some different areas. And I think over the coming weeks, will dive back in, similar to how we did with, the key responsibilities for a board of directors.
Right.
Is like, of having the conversation and then diving into more specifics, because I agree. I mean, it was every topic that I wrote down, there was like 2 paragraphs of explanation after
Uh-huh.
every point.
Exactly. Exactly.
To where it's like, and I do want, those, church leaders or ministers or members of a church is not to be afraid of that, but it's just to be aware that, hey, there are some additional things to consider in that. Now, there are some people out there, like, there's some people I've seen online that I think that they're organizations that do a deeper dive on your specific situation. They may know your specific state rules. And I do think for churches, this is one of those areas where I highly recommend that you work with a professional. Like, you can take some of the things that we say we that we'll cover in this. And I think it's just kind of making out a list of, hey, here are the questions that I need to ask when I hire a CPA or I hire a lawyer who knows my specific church and knows our specific situation, because you definitely want to keep that in mind. So, and I agree with you. I do think I've seen a lot more people considering that. I think part of that being the pandemic, with a lot of parents having to do homeschooling, to where they got a different perspective on their child's education. I think for some of them, some parents finally realize my child needs a little more attention than I thought. Or like,
Right.
hey, my child needs this specific thing kind of added to their curriculum for them to go to the next level. And now they're paying more attention to, hey, well, the school that they're going to, does it provide that? And hey, are there some other options out there? And I do think that too is, while the societal conversation grows about what is or what isn't appropriate to put in curriculums, I think people are becoming more and more vocal about what their preference is or what their perspective is about what they do or don't want their child to be exposed to. So I think this is, churches starting schools has become an even more heightened topic, I think, over the past couple of years.
Oh, absolutely. You see the things now with gender, the he, she, hers, all of that stuff, transgender, going to the restrooms. Some parents don't want to deal with that in the public school system. So how do you deal with that? You put your kid in a faith-based school who the church's beliefs align with your beliefs, and this is what your children are going to be taught. If you can afford
Mhm.
it, though, right? Because church schools are not free; they cost. But a lot of times, some churches have grant programs. They get federal grants where they allot a certain amount of income-based students. But some parents are choosing to get what they pay for. I don't want my child in the public school system, so I'm going this route. And with the church schools,
Mhm.
I said all the other reasons church start this school, but one of the primary reasons church starts school because it's an additional source of income for the ministry. Can we be real?
Right.
Childcare is expensive. Okay,
Mhm.
childcare is very, very expensive. It's a moneymaker for the church. So that's the other reason it needs to really be done and structured correctly, right? Because when you are running a business of this magnitude, dealing with children, one of our most precious gems, you have to do it the right way.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I always tell, whenever money gets involved, um, your level of transparency and your level of order and how you conduct it's like the ethics around what you're doing have to dramatically increase whenever money starts getting involved. Because anytime you're dealing with other people's money, and then especially when it comes down to, I think, churches, because then you get into tax exempt status, to where then your ethics and your transparency about what you are doing and your management has to go to a whole new level, because now you're getting, from the government's perspective, you're getting government breaks in the form of tax exemption. So I totally agree with you. So I want to talk a little bit about your the kind of highlight some of the 5 things you kind of put on the list.
Okay. I'll run through my list, and like I said, we could touch on these later, we'll do a deeper dive. But number one, all right. So top five legal concerns that a church should consider if they're forming a child care center or academy or school. Okay. Number one, you must comply with all laws, local, federal, state. And that's licensing, training, inspections, Department of Education. That could take a whole segment by itself. But there are rules. You can't just say, Pastor, the Lord put in my spirit during my prayer time, we gonna start school. Y'all go forth. No. Well, thank God for the vision. And I pray you got a team, right? A team. Your board members, yes, you may have educators in your church, but you need lawyers who are skilled in knowing what to do. You need finance people, CPAs who know how to do this. And so that's important. What are the rules, right? What are the laws? What steps do we need to take? We need to have a plan. So that's step one. You can't really have this successfully without complying with school. So, a school or daycare is very different than Sunday school, right? Or children's church during the services, right? So there's some different, and there should be rules with those as well, right? But there's some serious dies that you have to get into or comply with state, local, federal rules. All right, that's the main one. Number two, and this is important.
One question. I will say one question I want to ask about, when it comes down to the state and the federal, like from your perspective, like how often are those changing? Because I do think some people hear that and they're like, oh, okay, yeah, we're compliant. Like we did a check like a few years ago, like we were complying with what the law said a few years ago. Like how often are those, or how often can those laws and rules change?
Laws and rules can change every day. Any day your state legislators get together, they can change at any moment. I think anytime there's a for real update, they'll send out notices. They're going to be annual certifications and trainings that you need to take and meet with the school inspections. But laws can change at any time, and so you need to hear what happens when you have your lawyer on staff, which is going to be one of my points. You need to retain somebody to keep track of all this stuff for you, right? But you can't just say we started school 10 years ago and we're still running today like how we did 10 years ago. Because everything has changed. You know what I'm saying? So you're looking at your annual certification and what needs to be updated, at least at a minimum on an annual basis. Right? So, yeah.
Awesome. I love it. Yeah, you can continue with your list.
All right. Number two, if you're getting ready to start a church school or daycare, you need to review and update church bylaws. And why is this important? So where a church school differs from a public school is you can have faith-based beliefs, right? And I'm not going to say you can discriminate on who comes, but you can let anybody who comes to your school know, hey, this is our statement of faith. This is what we believe. We follow the Bible, this version. So, we don't believe in, no shade to nobody, y'all. This is just me saying what churches do. So if your church is a church where we don't do same-sex marriages, right? Not in the church. So if you are a same-sex couple and your child comes to school here, that's fine. But don't ask us why we're not teaching in our curriculum same-sex topics, right? Right. And so that becomes a thing. So if that was in a public school system, somebody could say, hey, man, this curriculum is biased. In a church, right? It's a little bit different because it's what this church believes. So it's very important to have a very clear statement of your church's faith beliefs, your Bible beliefs, so that that's clear to anybody who wants to not only attend but work there, right? And so if you have a rule at your church or at your church school that we're not having same-sex teachers, does that sound discriminatory? It could. Can my church say that? Good question, right? These are things that lawsuits are based upon, but it's important to have that spelled out from the onset and not making up rules as we go. So anybody who comes on board knows the church's beliefs. And I'm not saying that you have to believe this, but if you're going to work here, this is what we do. That's really important. And that's a big difference between churches and regular public institutions.
I think that one is a very important one that I think a lot of people probably are. I would say the way that they go about it is not understanding of like, hey, you need to be very clear about like what your values are as an organization. And it actually needs to be formally communicated, because I from just doing some research and even just talking with different churches, oftentimes I find that they end up getting in trouble about something because, like you said, they made up a rule as they go, or somebody made a judgment call on the spot, and it ended up in a lawsuit. And when it went through the court system, they looked and they said, what you did is nowhere documented in. So yeah, the court stepped in and ruled, and many people got upset saying, well, that's the court stepping in, that's not their place. And it's just like, well, if you don't make it clear of these essential things of how you operate, like, you expose yourself to a lot of confusion, a lot of, issues. And I think sometimes that, some people hesitate to make some things clear is because they either assume, that's not going to be an issue for us. People know where we stand on this. And I'm like, I've learned that people don't know.
No, not today's age, because it's different. The world is different. How we church is different. And so, like you said, very clear statement in your bylaws from the onset. Because if you do it ad hoc later, you do get sued and you will lose, right? Because now we can't, like you said, you can't unilaterally say, I don't want this. And none of your bylaws or policies ever stated that, because one person feels this way, or a group of people in the church feels this way. And let's be honest, this is what happened. You have a few judgmental people like, oh, no, that's not cool, right? And then you treat someone differently based on something like this, and you get sued. And so if it wasn't there from the beginning in your bylaws and in your beliefs, you could have some liability there. We've seen it happen. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Number 3, and this is a biggie, because 75% of all lawsuits against church schools or any schools comes from this: safety concerns for the children. That's one of the biggest steps. And it's supervision of children, ratios with staff to children to child. Those are very critical. In licensing, criminal and sex offender background checks for your employees and volunteers. And child abuse at daycare. 70% of all lawsuits against schools come down to safety concerns for children. I've seen some people in church schools, they have a belief system. I know some daycares, it's like, one, depending on the age of the child, one person for every 5 babies or whatever. Some churches or some schools have rules of 2 people minimum. No one child is left with one adult. Right, you could have 5 children and 1 adult, but not one child and 1 adult, right? Because you need these safety supervisions. Criminal and sex offender background checks. There are more children molested or abused in schools almost than any other place, especially in like these Catholic schools. And no shade on any denominations. I'm just giving you facts, right? So if you are a church looking to do a school, run criminal background checks, run sex offender checks, right? Permanent or, temporary. You need to see who's around these children, because you are liable for what these children are exposed to during the day. And you don't want children hurt on your time, because no one starts a church school with the premise or idea, we're going to hurt these kids. It's always the total opposite. But because we know people, or that's so-and-so's son, or they come from good stock, sometimes we don't do the due diligence that we need to. But we need to run these things, keep them on file, have training, make sure we have multiple trainings per year regarding these things, because it's critically important.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and it's one of those things I always tell parents too, is like, if you're a parent, and let's say you're listening to this because you want to learn, a little bit more about church schools, one of the things that I would also tell parents is you need to ask. If you're going to send your child to a school, you need to ask, like, hey, what's the background check process? Because you are sending your child somewhere, and that is a very fair question for you to ask. And because it is something that they should be doing. And if they're not doing it, then as a parent, it's like you have an option to make a different decision and say, hey, you know what? They're not doing this. This could put your child at risk. And that's a decision that you can intervene in as a parent.
Absolutely. And it's critically important, even down to who's the school janitor, who is around these children, the cafeteria, these things. Run background checks on everybody, not just teachers or people in the classroom. Any staff person, any employee. All right. Number 4, proper employee training. I can't stress this enough. You guys need to have employee handbooks. People need to be certified in childcare, have degrees in childcare, early childhood, whatever age we're teaching. We need to have discrimination training, sexual harassment training. Discipline and termination policies and procedures need to be laid out. So whenever you get a job with people, proper employee training, personnel training is critical. Because after the safety and well-being of children, your next lawsuits come from employee discrimination claims and all of those matters. So that stuff is really, really important. If you're running a school, you're running a business, we need to have some personnel policies, some training. People need to be certified to teach these kids. It needs to be legit because grandma was good with keeping the kids at her house back in the day. Does not mean that grandma needs to be over the child care program. Does grandma have license and certification? I'm serious, right? And when we're dealing with church schools, these are real things. Come on, Terrell, you know you see this stuff. So yeah,
You
proper
know,
employee
I
training
do,
is
and I
critical.
mean, I, I do, and it is very interesting that I think that so many people, when I talk to different organizations, different churches, when they talk about starting a school, they tend to just bypass these things like it's just, oh yeah, we have some volunteers that are gonna show up. And one of the things that I always say is like, when it comes down to a school, do understand that in the U.S. school is a compulsory thing, meaning like you don't have an option to say, hey, well, I just don't want my children to go to school. Like, school is a requirement. So when it comes down to it, there's a lot more attention paid to, okay, what is the child going to understand? What are they going to learn? Like, what's the point of them going to school? So when I see churches and they're like, oh yeah, we have a couple volunteers that are going to show up, and it's just like, one thing that people learned during the pandemic is teaching is no easy job. Like, I mean, teaching does require some experience, some skill. There is more than just grabbing a book, standing in front of people, and just asking them to read what's in the book. I mean, there is some skill involved. And I like that point you made about that kind of that employee training and having that handbook. And hey, what are the criteria that teachers should have or staff members should have? And I think that within itself, I think from a management side, I think it just makes things flow a lot smoother. And from a legal side, I mean, all day long, documenting it will be your best friend.
Absolutely, absolutely. So yes, another one that's really, really important. You must maintain adequate insurance coverage at all times. And when we're dealing with a school, we're talking about all types of insurance. So you need property insurance, you need general liability insurance, you just need insurance, 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 because all of these concerns that could come up and these claims that could come up, you want to make sure that your school is properly insured. Okay. So maintaining adequate liability insurance coverage, property damage insurance coverage, what might could happen insurance coverage, that's going to be major. Okay.
Yeah.
That's going to be major.
Yeah. And I would definitely say, I mean, I think for a
Those are my
lot of
top five.
churches, okay, so for a lot of churches, I would say is they may be very unfamiliar with insurance. And I think this may be an area where you want to have a relationship with with an insurance agent, and not just, hey, just go pick somebody at random, like, hey, this person sells insurance on the side. Like, you want someone that actually understands.
Right. No, that's real. Because there are different types of insurance. So you need somebody who's familiar with insuring things like schools. And like I said, there are going to be some state requirements and federal requirements for the type of insurance you need to have. But I know a lot of churches that just have one small general liability policy. What they had it forever with so and so who got the insurance agency on the other side of town, and we can't do that here because the risks are serious, right? And so you need that. Yeah.
Absolutely,
So
absolutely.
I got an honorable mention too. I got an honorable mention number 6. Okay. All right. So those are my top five. A close, something that should have made it in the top five. Get legal support for your school or daycare, right? If you don't even have the money to retain and a counsel monthly, you need to have a relationship with somebody who can give you legal advice to not only defend you when you get lawsuit, but give you guidance on the front end so maybe you can avoid the lawsuits. Okay. And a really good attorney will not only defend you, but they'll play offense for you. So they'll set your policies up. We'll come in, we'll train your staff and your people. We'll look at your insurance coverage. We'll look at your policies. We'll look at your bylaws and give you information on the front end to avoid the lawsuits and defending against this stuff on the back end. Okay. That's an honorable mention.
Awesome. I love it. I love it. Well, as we've said before, I mean, well, we don't have the luxury of staying on here for hours at a time. Uh, we, we are two busy people. So, as I said, this will be a a multi, I guess you say, week episode because even as you just heard, like we just went through just her top five legal. We didn't even go through the finance side. And I'm telling you, there's a little bit more. Well, there's a lot more to the legal that she didn't cover. So we're definitely going to have this continue this conversation over multiple weeks. And then one of the things we'll do, because it is a lot to take in, is in the Facebook group, we'll be posting kind of like, hey, here are the bullet points of the things that we talked about. And that way, because I think at the end of the day, the goal for you, I think, would be is to be aware of these topics and then to kind of understand if your church is serious about starting a school, these are the types of topics we need to talk about amongst the board members. Hey, these are the type of topics we need to talk about to get outside counsel to come in and advise us on these things, because this will not be a decision made, or this should not be a decision made by one person, and it should not be a decision that is made lightly. So I definitely think I want you guys to continue to tune in. But before we wrap up, Harry, any final thoughts before we wrap up?
No, I can't wait to hit the financial side because next week, because I know a lot of churches who have started schools and daycares, and unfortunately, some of them have closed. And I don't think they got the financial guidance from a Terrell or someone similar like that to avoid that. So when you start these things, you should be thinking long term. I want this open for the next 50 years, and we're going to have to plan on the front end and make strategic plans throughout to see it through to the next generation. But Terrell will hit on that next week. And I'm going to say this, and Terrell, don't shoot me. Terrell and I advise churches. And now we are so busy, but we are not too busy for the Lord. And so, although we might not be licensed in your state, we give advice. I give advice all over the country. Terrell gives advice all over the world. If you need a consultation, if your church needs a consultation on these matters or other legal and financial topics that you've heard us discuss, let us know. Hit us up. Terrell, I think we should start putting a number or email at least in the lower thirds on the screen so they can see it. So you hit our staff up and we'll see if we can meet Zoom or whatever it needs to be, because we're doing this overall, but we want your church to be in the legal and financial position that it needs to be in so you can do kingdom work. So Terrell, don't shoot me, because I didn't even tell Terrell I was going to say that, because usually I'll call Terrell and be like, hey, this church wants to talk to me. Can you come? Right? And he's so gracious. He comes because we come together, but we're just putting that out there. All right. That's all I got, Terrell. Don't be mad at
me. I will say I'm not mad. I think it, I mean, but that is a good idea to put the contact information on it. So we'll definitely work on that, getting that into the lower thirds. And I think because there are a lot of people who do need better guidance. And one of the things the final thing I will say is, I think when we started doing these lives and we talked about doing this Facebook group or putting out this information, it really came down to is helping people make informed decisions. Because I think there are too many people that are making decisions and they have no idea what they are doing. They don't know what questions to ask. They don't know what topics to think about. But I think it is all about making informed decisions. And I will definitely tell churches is, having a consultant, someone who understands the subject matter, come in, take a look at some stuff and help you put things in place, especially when you start looking at things like starting a school, because then you're not just accountable to, your members in your church. You now make yourself accountable, especially if you're bringing in funding from outside of your members, like whether you're bringing in state funding, you're accepting vouchers. The level of accountability has to go to a whole new level. So we're definitely going to continue talking about that. And I'm not mad at you, Harry. It's all good.
Thank you. All right.
All right. Until next time, you guys stay tuned.